I was 10 when the war broke out. And my first days at Way Deacon was spent 1 week in Blackpool, evacuated, and then we were moved to Fleetwood. We used to do alternate afternoons and mornings with Fleetwood Grammar School. So we alternated. 1 week we did mornings and they did afternoons, and the next week, of course, it was reversed. But that only lasted till Christmas, because we came home for Christmas, and the parents, some of us didn't go back. I didn't go back to Fleetwood after Christmas, and the parents demanded that the school come back. So we only had 3 months evacuation. And it was often, your education was often interrupted, because if the sirens went, they'd fix the cloakrooms with metal support for the roof and made them as air raid shelters. So we used to go into the cloakrooms as air raid shelters, and then when the all clear went, we went back to our normal lessons. Except that if the sirens went off at, say, 3:30 and cleared at 3:45, well, we went home then. We missed a quarter of an hour. But we still played rugby and played other schools. My first game was the second team against Boltler Grammar School in Warrington. I think it was a religious foundation originally. They were never any good at rugby, because they played soccer or hockey one term and rugby the next, so they never mastered anything really. And of course all the young men went off to war, all the young teachers. Some went to war, some went because of their language ability, went into some of them went one was at Bletchley. So they weren't actually in the forces, but J.D. Jones, who was a Welshman, he was on the, I think, mortar torpedo boats, and he was proficient in Russian and Latin, but he was quite a character. I remember when I first joined the golf club, the pro said to him, "You know Abby, don't you?" And he said, "Never met him in my life." And the pro said, "Yes, you did. He was captain of the old Wids." "Yes," he said, "the bugger who went north. That was because I signed for St Helens." But when I finished at school in 1946, so the war had just ended, and the old Wids had reformed, but they couldn't always muster a team. So I could play for the school in the morning, and then I'd be having a Saturday lunch, and a coach would pull up at the door and they'd say, "Get your boots, we're short." And I'd go off and play. And I can remember once or twice, we went to Eccles with 11 men and won against 15. And of course, at holiday times, when everybody came from college and university, I can remember we went to play, I think it was an RAF team on the Whittle, and we won by 100 points because we had Paddy Quinn and Reg Higgins, who later became British Lions. They went to South Africa. Both sadly had very sad deaths, really. Reg committed suicide, and Paddy Quinn was killed coming home from Twickenham. But Paddy Quinn did turn professional. Reg was a member of a rugby league family, his dad was an international prop. His uncle was an international rugby league second row, but Reggie never went professional at all. Very tough character. I remember when Alf Saltz, who founded the old Wids in the 20s, I think, when he entered us in the rugby league seven-a-sides against the likes of Marylebone Shamrocks and West Bank, who thought because we were grammar school lads we were soft. Yeah, these lads were from Newtown and all the rough areas of Widnes, West Bank, always produced good rugby players. And Alf entered us for these seven-a-sides, which it could have, if it had got to the ears of the rugby union people, would have banned us for life. It was, in those days, it was unbelievable. When my father got involved with the Wids, I wasn't allowed in the clubhouse because I'd played for St Helens. Things are much different now, of course. But after the war, we gradually got more mature players. One of the best centres we had was a fellow called Fred Pro, who was a dentist. Used to practice in Albert Road, above his mother's cake shop. He was a bit of a character, was Fred. Some priest he knew had taught him all sorts of... he was a Roman Catholic, and he had these bawdy songs that we used to sing in the coach, and he always reckoned that a priest had taught him this. But he was tough. He'd played for Liverpool University before the war, and then he came back. So we were youngsters. I was playing for the Wids when I was about 17 years of age. I think I was 20 when they asked me to be captain. Never really performed as captain because I was appointed captain at the end of the 49 season, and before I started in the 50 season I was playing at St Helens in the 80. So but I've got a photograph somewhere, and there's a lot of more mature people on that. It was a bit chaotic in some ways. I can remember we went to the Whittle once to play a team called Upton, and you went by train, and then you went on the underground to the Whittle, and I think we spent 2 hours walking round the Whittle looking for Upton and never found it. So we never really played that fixture. And then the Wids got, as time went on, they got more established. But they never got the best players from Wade Deacon because they were recruited by Liverpool, New Brighton, Waterloo, which were the big clubs in those days. But when professionalism came in, those clubs have virtually gone. Waterloo's struggling and New Brighton is struggling. So things changed a lot between the end of the war. There was no rugby league in Widnes during the war, so a lot of the class rugby league players played for Halifax. The best scrum half Widnes ever had was a fellow called Tommy McHugh, and he played for Halifax. A friend of mine played for Halifax as a winger. Alan Prescott. He finally finished up as captain of the rugby league team, but he moved from winger to loose forward, and he finished up as a prop. And he was big in those days. I can remember getting weighed at St Helens and he was 15 stone 8, which seemed a tremendous weight. These days he'd be 3 stone too light. He had a bad end, Alan, but he was a Widnes lad. Widnes produced a lot of top class rugby players. Sadly, some of them are in homes now. Frank Myler is, who turned down an MBE, actually, Frank. One of my neighbours next door but 2, who's dead now, George Smith, thought it was disgraceful that Frank had never been honoured. He was the last rugby league captain to go to Australia and New Zealand and win the series, but he refused it. And George was campaigning to get him something, and I knew it was useless, because once you refuse, they'll never offer it again. And Frank told me, he said, well, it's not for the likes of me, it's for people who've done something with their life. Well, I think he was wrong. He should have accepted it. But unfortunately, he's in a home now, Frank. I was talking to him in there last week, but I don't think he knew me, but I don't think he knew who I was. Yeah. But in the war, Widnes, funnily enough, it was bombed more than once, but never any real damage done. One plane, it must have been coming back from Liverpool and decided to drop his load, and I think there was a stick of 8 bombs, and most of them fell. One fell on the ICI wreck, one fell where the present new town hall is, which then was a field, and I think there's one house up at Ditton hit, and there was a German plane brought down on the ICI wreck. We used to spend our childhood on the golf course looking for shrapnel. And if you found a nose cone of a shell, that was a real prize. But there was an Italian camp, and there was one down Barras Green Lane as well. And I think the Germans eventually in the one down Barras Green Lane. And I used to work my school holidays on the farm. I had a friend, Ken Humphreys, who was the son of a farmer. So I think we got 1.06 an hour or something like that in those days, which is equal to 7.5 pence now. And the prisoners of war could volunteer to work, and 2 of them worked on the farm. And farming, of course, was one of the reserved occupations as well. It was one way of dodging national service. If you left school and went in on farming, you didn't go into the army. And I remember the day we were working in the fields, the day that the Italians collapsed, and one of them was a fascist, and one of them was a peasant, really, when he was back in Italy. And the peasant was so pleased, and the fascists said, propaganda, propaganda. They would never give in, but they had. So, but they used to wander around the streets, and some of the local girls would go out with them. And I mean, one family, 2 girls I knew, I still remember their names, but I won't tell you. But they started off with Americans, and then Italians, and finished with the Germans. And they were well known around the town. So, but Widnes generally wasn't affected too much. There was an ice cream family, Gandolfo's. They had an ice cream factory under the arches, the railway arches downtown, and they had a shop. Everybody in the town knew Amy Gandolfo. She served in the shop. But at the beginning of the war, they broke the windows, some people, because they were Italian. They threw bricks at the windows. And he actually put a piece in the Weekly News to say, although they were Italian, they were British Italians. And he put that in the paper. So, oh yes, my father worked at what was called William Olroyd's in those days. It later became part of Croda. And they made gelatine for Rowntree's. You used to see lorries going along Ditton Road with fleshings from the tanneries and the bones they used to have. And the factory was based on steam. All they did was boil this stuff. And a liquor came on the top. And the first liquor was the finest. And that was ground into small granules, which were sent to Rowntree's and places like that. It was jelly. As a matter of fact, they called William Olroyd's the jelly factory, the jelly. And that was made into jelly. And then the various grades went down, and the lowest grade was Scotch glue, which joiners used a lot. And I can remember at Way Deacon, we did woodwork there, and there was always a pot of this glue on a stove melting. It was actually bombed and no damage done. It was what we used to call a landmine. It used to come down on a parachute, and it dropped through the roof and exploded. And I remember my father having to go out to this place, and it had exploded before it hit the ground, so it did no damage apparently. You can hardly. Now one landed in Farnworth and demolished. People were killed opposite the old Everite works around there. A landmine dropped and killed people. But my father, because he was working there, was on a reserved occupation. I think he would have, if it had been conscripted. He was in his 40s, so it would have been the last days of the war. But he was reserved occupation there. Because the glue that they made, by the end of the war, we were short of aluminium. I can remember at the beginning, carts coming around. I lived in the Kingsway scheme, and carts used to come round, and women were throwing their aluminium pans into it to provide aluminium for the planes. But towards the end of the war, they came up with this fighter bomber, the Mosquito, which was mainly wood. And Olroyd's was crucial because of the glue, because they were glued together. It's unbelievable. But I can see a Mosquito in my mind now that it was twin-engined, and it was a fighter bomber. So Widnes, in those days, it wasn't the biggest chemical town in the world, but it was the biggest producer of chemicals, Widnes and Runcorn, in the world. And there were that many chimneys in the town. The last chimney was brought down by Fred Dibner down at West Bank. During the war, if a day like today, you wouldn't be able to see across the road. It'd be covered with what we used to call pea soupers, and you could taste the sulphur in it. The buses used to go off the road. They wouldn't drive. and gradually, well, where's the industry in Widnes now? Or Runcorn, chemical industry has died in the town virtually. I'm not sure what they do at Peter Spence now, but the place was full of chemical. My grandfather worked during the First World War in one of the factories in Widnes. I think it was Deacon's, and they had no masks or anything like that. They used to wear a wet sack around the nose and the face to protect them, and he always had a bad chest forever after that. And I remember one of my aunts worked in the munitions factory at Risley. They called it the hush hush because you weren't allowed to speak about it. And her hair was yellow, and it wasn't because it was dyed, it was because they were filling shells with gunpowder, and it must have had this yellow tint to it. So and I think most of that factory was underground, but I couldn't swear to that. So it was crucial to the war effort, and really, it's a wonder it wasn't bombed more than it was. I remember the plane coming down with the ICI wreck in flames. And again, it landed on the field, it did no damage at all. 2 of the Germans were captured at the back of St Michael's Roman Catholic Church and were made prisoners of war, and 2 died in the crash. They were buried in Farnworth, in the local cemetery. But it must be 10 or 15, some years ago anyhow, the family came over from Germany and had them exhumed and took the bodies, or what was left of them, back to Germany. So the Italians, it was quite a common sight to see them around the town. The Germans not so much. Can't remember any of the Germans volunteering to work on the farm. Unlike the 2 Italians we had. Where the Linton and Bude and St Maur's housing estate is, and where the old Wids, close to where the old Wids is now, there was an Italian camp. Initially, it was a gun site, and there was a mobile gun on the back of a lorry, which used to whiz around the town to give the impression that when the German planes came over, that there were lots of guns around Widnes. And I can remember it stopping outside the houses round Henderson Road there and firing. And then when that moved, we had machine guns on bits of spare land as well. Lewis guns, I think they were, that were firing, and there were balloon barrages all around the town. Lord Hawke was at Curedley in the balloon barrage, and my father-in-law, before he volunteered to go in the RAF, joined the balloon barrage people. And Lord Hawke was a bit of a character, and he used to sit on a roof with a bow and arrow and say to my father-in-law, "You spot them, Lawley, and I'll shoot them down." He was that sort of character. But this gun site up at Ditton became a prisoner of war camp for the Italians. The golf club didn't spread as far as that initially, and along the 5th fairway there are still some bricks in the ground which are the footings of the original prisoner of war camp. And after the war, the golf club expanded a bit and took that land. There was also a wood at the edge, bottom where Deacon's School field, and on the edge of the golf course there was a wood and the farmers were Kelsall, so it was called Kelly's Wood, and that's been taken into the playing fields of Way Deacon and Peter and Paul now. But then when the Wids, they used to play at the grammar school, and the clubhouse was the Crown pub. They used to train in the week in the gym and go straight in the Crown pub and undo all the good they'd done training. But then I'd left them by that time, but they bought this land up at Heath Road. I think I know him, Williams, who lived in Fairfield Road, and his sons went to Way Deacon. George played for the ICI Rugby Union. He wasn't really good enough to play for the Old Wids, so the ICI were, they would deny it, but they were never up to the standard of the Old Wids. It was a sort of end of season fixture with them, and we always knew we were going to win it. And they moved the huts, and my father, who was a joiner, by that time, not watching me, but mainly my brother, he got involved, who never went to Way Deacon, but it reached the stage where we were short of players, and we had 2 or 3 who came in, non-ex-Way Deacon people who played for the Wids. So my father got involved, and he got involved in moving these huts and making the first clubhouse up there. And then he got involved as the bucket man, and they had to put the showers on, the heaters on. He used to go up and do that sort of thing. He got very involved. And I've seen a plaque up there to acknowledge what he did, and I think they've named 2 rooms up there. I think one's Alf Salt. Alf, yeah, there's lots of people around Widnes. One of my neighbours got the DFC. He worked in the Co-op before the war, was conscripted into the RAF, and was a navigator and got the DFC. After the war, he trained as a teacher under the emergency scheme and taught at Sims Cross School. Eric Williams is his name. There's a lot of people around Widnes who are not acknowledged. Somebody who knew Widnes could do a regular article in the weekly news on famous, or people who should be famous and are not, Widnesians who've done all sorts of diverse things in the town or nationally, but there's a lot of things about Widnes that are not really acknowledged. It had the finest water in Britain because it was all well water. And they're reopening one of the wells, Belvale, I think it is, or Stockswell. 2 of the wells were in Liverpool, and the well water was pumped up to Peck's Hill, and when the water was privatised, utilities closed the wells down, but they're reopening them. And the other side of Birchfield Road have had letters to say that they're going to change their water supply to well water again. It's going to be pumped up to Peck's Hill.